So take your time starting up, especially if this is your first session of the year, either live or watching the recording. There's no hurry with these things, and you can feel sometimes that you've had a bit of a break and you've lost everything. You haven't. It may just have receded a bit, but it will come back. Just standing, feet hip width apart. So these parallel lines, shoulders to hips to feet, whether you're measuring it from the outside of the foot or from the inside, some point in between, whatever's more comfortable for you. Toes pointing forwards as much as possible, albeit slightly turned out perhaps, but generally speaking, where we've got everything sort of focused in the same direction. The weight just a little bit forwards and your hips sinking back. And this is a process that obviously, you know, one of the things that's going on here is an adjustment of your posture. We're trying to bring ourselves into line with the pull of gravity and to drop our center of gravity. But at the same time, we're just making the effort to bring our attention back into our body. And that helps to just settle our thoughts, maybe only for a moment or two, doesn't matter. But just to get that sense of stillness, not just in the body as we settle into a nice sort of rooted posture, but also in our thoughts. And our thoughts can feel a bit like, you know, butterflies on a flower bed or something like that, constantly landing and taking off. It's those moments of landing that we want to cultivate. It's perfectly normal for your thoughts to drift away. And in fact, you know, I mean, in many senses, we actually want that to happen. We don't want to pretend that we're in some kind of isolated bubble, not connected to the environment that we're in. Soften your knees and just beginning to turn in the center of your body. Just using the movements as a focus of attention. Noticing the effect of that movement in the middle of your body. Where do you feel the outcome of that? I mean, obviously, when we turn in the center, our shoulders move, our arms move, but what about the legs? And at this point, we're not necessarily thinking in terms of this is right, this is wrong. With that slightly calmer quality developing in our attention, we can begin to notice things, and beyond that, we can begin to decide, well, actually, I don't want my knee to twist around, but I want my shoulders to move or whatever. So as we get to know the movements better, and this is a very simple movement, and it's a great movement for this process to begin, we start to work out what is appropriate, what is skillful in terms of our movements, what do we want to try and cultivate, what do we want to try and find ways to sort of remove from the equation. And this is an ongoing process in Tai Chi. And remember, we've all picked up, for one reason or another through our lives, habits of movement. It may be an injury or a physical illness or condition or something like that. It might be the work that we've done. If you spent a long time, for instance, working at a keyboard, it's going to have an effect on your posture. And it's going to have a different effect to, say, somebody who's worked in a supermarket and spent a lot of their lives reaching up and stacking shelves and so on and so forth. And again, we're not trying to pass judgment on them, but you know, some of those habits we will want to let go of, to begin to bring about a change. Because we're moving a little bit quicker, your breathing will pick up a little bit, your circulation will pick up, your heart will start to beat faster. And if we can just allow the back of our body, our upper body, back and spine, to support the front of the body, then our breathing will automatically begin to deepen. We don't need to, at this stage, apply ourselves to a breathing method. If you know the breathing method that you're comfortable with and you wish to apply it to any of the movements, then by all means do. But don't impose the method. It should feel a very natural movement. Your arms hanging from your shoulders feel quite heavy. And there's a movement in the shoulder joint. You're not doing anything with your arms, they're just hanging. It's the movement of your body that's moving your arms for you. So it's almost like somebody's taken hold of your arm and they're just moving the arm around in your shoulder joint. So it's quite a smooth feeling in your shoulders, upper back. And these are all aspects of movement and posture that we want to become familiar with so that they're present in the exercises. And if you do a Tai Chi form or anything like that, we want them present in the form. I'm going to have to move forwards a bit for the next movement, otherwise I'll crack my hands on the wall behind me. Now what we want to do, without losing those qualities, is to bring a little bit more definition, a little bit more shape to what our arms are doing. But we want to do that without suddenly, say, tightening up in our shoulders and losing that feeling of that sense of massage within the shoulder joint. So turn your hands palm out, elbows soft, and you're just raising your hands up a little bit. Find the right position here. Arms up, angled out from your shoulders, not too high, so it's a little bit more open across the chest, but feels as though your elbows are quite heavy. So rather than thinking you've got to sort of strain your shoulders to lift your arms, it's almost like you've got a heavy box in your arms. You're letting yourself drop down, and that will encourage movement from the rest of your body, and in particular from the center of your body, which is something we'll come back to a little bit later. Now, for experienced people, it's always good to remind ourselves. We can get very caught up in sort of detail and this movement and that movement. It's actually quite interesting for me after a break when I'm maybe a little bit out of condition and I've lost some of the sharpness of the movements, to remind myself of the significance of these very, very subtle, very important key principles. And then just let your hands drop down. The first exercise is very simple but very important, very difficult, I might add. So in this basic stance, just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. And as you go back, eventually that will happen. You'll stiffen up, you'll stumble, whatever. Likewise, going forwards. So in the first instance, try not to go too far, lean out too far and gravity takes over. And what we're looking to find first of all is how far can the weight move in our feet from the front to the back of the feet without that happening. And in practice, you should find it's roughly around about the balls of the feet when you go forwards and the front part of your heel when you go back. So through the arch of your foot. So we get this sense of movement, and again a sort of massaging quality in the big muscles in the sole of the foot. It's quite nice on the feet, that feeling. But that's not the main purpose of the exercise. So we begin to feel how when a change happens in our feet and in our legs, it affects the whole body. Because if I use, for example, this pole, you can see if I'm not going to bend down and do it, but if I were to move the bottom of the pole, then the whole pole would move, and if I were to turn it back, it would move back. So I get this movement, and if you look from the side, imagine the the pole in the middle of my body, this begins to happen. I want to try and avoid this for the moment. I'm not trying to bend. And we want to try and find that position for the weight in our feet, where rather than even a slight sense of being drawn forwards or backwards, we feel as though our weight is being drawn down into our legs. And you'll find that you pass through that point, a kind of neutral point, a point of equilibrium. And that point and that feeling, it's not just about the physical point, but that feeling will be one that again we reference later in the exercises. So the traditional point would be just behind the ball of each foot, but it may be different for you. As you start to get that point, what we're going to do is, as you come forwards towards it, rather than going beyond it, we try and just rest in that point. And instead of the whole body moving forwards and backwards, what begins to happen is our hips begin to sink down, and then we push up. The body expands and contracts. So we're trying to maintain this alignment with the pull of gravity. Tai Chi, in its origins, was a martial art. Martial arts are very concerned with how we respond to forces, to energies working on our body and coming out of our body. Movement is another way you could think of it. And in the solo exercises, we practice that idea with the pull of gravity. Gravity is probably the primary force that acts on us. As a martial art, Tai Chi functions not by challenging force with force, but rather by yielding to that force and working with the pattern of movements. This is not simply going with the flow. This is like if you were swimming in the sea and you wanted to get to the shore, say, rather than fight against the waves and exhaust yourself, you would sort of have a sense of the pattern of movement and go in as the wave comes in, or whatever. So it's not an idea unique to Tai Chi. It's one that we specialize in. Now bring your hands around as though you're cradling a ball. Push up, and the expansion in your body pushes your elbows out, so you're lifting the ball, and then on the way down, as though you're pressing the ball down. Now just notice, are you still moving in your legs? Or has your tension changed? And this is very common. I'm going to come closer so you can see. We're doing this, and I've seen roomfuls of people, and I've done this. You're doing this nice and easy. Legs are moving, so on and so forth. And then you bring the arms in, and suddenly it's all there. And what we're trying to do is to get a sense for our whole body moving as one unit. And I talked about the center of your body, that area between hips and waist earlier. That part of the body connects to every part of the body. So if there's going to be a connection, say, between your feet and your shoulders, it's going to have to pass through this central area one way or another. So that center part of your body becomes a primary point of focus. And we extend that focus from there down into the ground. And we want to maintain this habit of following upper body, following what's happening, lower body in the center. Just as we were when we were doing this, the shoulders were following the movement of the hips and waist. So I call this exercise rooting down because the principal feature of this is this gradual settling of our center of gravity. Our center of gravity, if it's too high, will make us unstable, cause tension in the body. So for instance, if I give you a heavy box and say to you, hold it up above your head, the shoulders would stiffen up very easily. You'll probably start to wobble around a bit. Whereas if you hold the box down low, you'll feel more stable, less strain on your back, on your shoulders, on your arms. And we apply that idea in the first instance, and then realize that actually the very act of sinking down is a bit like bouncing the ball. You need to sink down in order to get that sense of the energy rising up. Now this time, turn your hands palm out. Keep the movement in your legs and your hips. Center myself. And this is the wild goose. So what I've just been talking about with the previous exercise is quite sort of technical, quite physical in a sense. I mean, there's always an element of awareness that goes with these things. We're always trying to work with mind and body equally in Tai Chi. And one of the ways that we do that is through the use of imagery. And the wild goose, the clear image, you imagine the bird in flight, for instance, or waving a feather up and down in the air. And if it's the right image for you, that will begin to, how can I put it? That will begin to create a feeling, some kind of association. That can be a very personal thing, but some feelings, of course, are more universal. And that awareness of those feelings feeds into our body. Our bodies are very responsive to our minds, even if we don't realize it. And then change into the exercise we call parting the cloud, still sinking down in your hips. This time let your hands cross, push up, your elbows going out, drawing your fingers around in this nice smooth circle. So not every image will work for us, and this is a good example of an exercise that took me quite a while to really come to terms with the image. As soon as I did, it was great, but it seemed like a daft name to me, to be honest, to start off with. But then I realized if you know that the sun coming out from behind the clouds, if you've got one of those really grey days with low cloud, you can feel sort of punched over as though the clouds were pushing down on your head. Then there's a break in the clouds and everything seems to just open up. So this is very much a feeling in our back and our belly and our chest that we're looking for here. So do one more of these. And then we're going to go back to the first of these exercises, rooting down, and do them as a little sequence. So the movement in your hips and your legs, the rhythm of the movement, expanding and contracting, is a constant, change into the wild goose. But we get the variations through the upper part of the body, partly through the change in image, name part in the clouds now, partly through an awareness that grows of the physical resonances. Where do you feel the movement? What patterns of movement, what pathways of movement begin to emerge for you? And in particular, as you change from one movement to another. So this all brings our attention more closely within our body. And we begin to feel the interaction of mind and body much more deeply. I keep using the term mind and body, but really the whole idea that they're separate is not what we're trying to develop. Our intent begins to shape our movements. But the shape of the movements and our responses to the movements feed back into our mind and into our intent. One more round of this little set. So mind and body are training together here. Now, still with that up and down movement in your hips, push up and expanding on one side. This is dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Rotate your arm, sink your hips. Let that movement of the hips draw your elbow down. Move slowly to the other side. Try not to rush. The tendency is always to want to speed up. We all seem to have this habit of sort of, it must be done now. I think one of the great benefits of Tai Chi is that it counters that. So by paying attention to our body and the movements, taking time to make the change from one side to another, not rushing, making sure that we complete each movement before we try and start the next. It just encourages a slowing down in our attention and again a stillness in our mind that enhances our ability to observe. So another example where it's not mind and body, but rather the body-mind interacting on different levels. Just do one more after this. And this time, just let your hands drop down and stand again for a moment. The hips just dropping back slightly. I'll exaggerate this. It needn't be that much, but you want to try and feel, particularly through lower back, hips, and buttocks, this feeling of being pulled down. It's not something we don't have to make ourselves go down because gravity is pulling you down. It shouldn't be difficult to drop your hips, although it is, but it's not a complicated idea. And what happens is when we do this, when we do it in a big way like this, but even when we're not actively moving up and down, so long as we're not blocking that movement by holding our hips or our back or our knees tight, there is a movement down within our body. Now, if that's all there was, we would just collapse. We would just fall on the floor in a kind of puddle because gravity would be pulling us down. So the movement downwards will automatically create a movement upwards. As though the body were a giant spring. You look at my little friend here. There, it's a pen holder actually, but there it's got a spring. As soon as I push down, I can feel the movement upwards. Or if you get a ball or a block of wood and you push it down into a bowl of water or a bath or something like that, as soon as you start to push down, you can feel the push up. So not only can we feel the movement downwards, but as a result of that, we can begin to become aware of the movement upwards. So whether we're actively moving our hips up and down or not, we're encouraging and we're going to be working with this two-way movement, downwards with the pull of gravity, upwards with the response of our body to that. So we want to try not to block either. We don't want ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, back or anything like that to become tight, because that will create a block to the movement. In this position, just slowly this time, turn from side to side a little bit in hips and waist. Feel how your shoulders follow. So it's almost as though that downward and upward movement, that vertical movement, get translated into a horizontal turning movement. So bring your hands to your sides, and then keeping your hips sinking back, hands come to the front a little bit and push up this time, just a little above your head, and then back down beside your hips. And then lift again, and this time let your elbows drop so you end up pushing sideways and back. Your hands will stay slightly in front of your body, and be aware that there's often, particularly when we lift our arms up, a tendency to want to pull them back. Try not to do that. Doing my hands slightly in front, likewise here as I push out. It's not a long way in front, but just it's not there, you see. Again, the movement, feel what's happening in your back as you do. It's very soft, again, massaging quality. This time you push out, then you turn a little bit in your hips, and that adjusts the angle of your arms without you having to do anything extra. Come back, turn the other way, and back, and then you face the front and you push out. So we've got 4 directions of movement. The first one is facing forwards and upwards. The second 2, the middle 2 movements, are a sideways push, but with the turning. And that's all we need to do to change the direction of the arms. And then the 4th and last part of the set, you're facing forward with the push out. So again, nice and steady. And again, just giving yourself time to complete the movement. Notice that there's often an urge as your hands come down. Part of you is thinking, oh, I've got to do this. But just take your time. Let your hands come to the starting position and then start the next movement. And again, this encourages a quietening, not only of body, but of mind as well. Expand in and contract. Do one more round of this. And then let your hands drop down again. And this time, picking up on the expanding movement and letting it push one hand out up until it's in line with your nose and then straight down. So a half circle. Move back a bit so my hand doesn't disappear. Again. The opening, the expansion on that side of your body. This time, if it's comfortable, you bring your hand to the top and then you turn again. So again, the center of the body becomes a bit like the control room, a bit like an old-fashioned telephone exchange, where sort of like people talking into their phones would be transmitted into the exchange, and then from the exchange out to whoever they were talking to. Change in sides. So one of our principal intentions in Tai Chi would be to develop a kind of strong connection between our heads, our brains, where obviously a lot of mental activity has its source, and this center part of our body, so that those activities in the brain can be fed out to the appropriate part of the body. Again, just turn it. Over a period of time, you'll find that this awareness, this intent to focus into the center of your body becomes more accessible to you. And then just come back to standing for a moment. It's also this part of the body which we want to sink towards the ground. We sometimes call it sitting, and it's almost like you're going to sort of squat on the ground or something like that. You don't have to take it that far. But so in many ways, this becomes a very significant area of the body to bring the focus of our attention into. And in the course of time, you'll find that you're able to bring your attention more smoothly into that area, and we associate it strongly with a sense of stillness, of quietness, of spaciousness. There's various things, various terms that we could use. So those moments in our day when we feel crowded in one way or another, under pressure, we can find some kind of space from them in our thoughts, if not in our body, but bringing our attention back in that way. Now, mostly this part of the body, the center, sometimes referred to as the lower dantian, stays level. But the next two exercises, we begin to see how what happens when we rotate vertically in the pelvis. So if I push my hips back, my head goes forwards. And then if I want my head to come up again, I could try and strain in my back and my shoulders. My head is quite heavy. It's quite a weight. Or if I can, I just allow gravity itself to pull my hips down and let that movement bring me up. And the next two exercises use that. Please, especially if you're not used to this, be very careful of your knees and of your back. Don't overdo the movements. I'll do them quite big so you can see what I'm doing, but that doesn't mean that you have to. First of all, go back to this movement, sinking down and pushing up in your hips that we started previous exercises with. Pelvis remaining level. Come a bit closer so you can see. I have to go back when I bring my hands in to the movement. This time, as I go down, I'm going to deliberately push my hips back, and that means I extend forwards. Remember, I'm doing this quite big. And rather than pulling myself up, my next move is to let my hips drop back as though I was sitting down into a chair, and then I push up. And we're looking for a very smooth, open quality in the upper part of our bodies as we come to the upright position, as opposed to a very tight, stiff quality, which we often get when we're trying to raise our heads up. And then our arms following the movement. This is rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Just feel how your back extends gently. And then we settle back here and push up. Arms are pushed up. Easing forwards as you drop your heads. So this is how we begin to learn to maintain and to come back to that alignment with the pull of gravity, Just as again in the sea, swimming, you might notice where the wave is going and move with that. Maybe let the wave help you, push you into the shore. And in the same way, we let gravity help us by letting our hips drop back to bring our head up high. One more time. And then hands in front of your hips, turn horizontally, then push your hips back, and that'll push your hands forwards, turn again, and then let your hips drop down. And you would have brought your hands around in a circle, change direction. And this is called polishing the table. Again, don't overdo the movement. It's fine just to do a small movement. We're really interested in the actions of the hips and the pelvis initially. Of course, we want to extend our range of movement, but you're not going to do yourself any favors by thrusting your hands out, stretching out, and pulling a muscle in your back. So these are things that we can work on the range of the movement, working out from the basic principles in Tai Chi. It's partly a two-way process. By doing the movements, we learn about which principles we want to work on and we want to cultivate. We then, in a way, could say this is an application of some of those principles. Polishing the table. One more time in each direction. And then just come back to standing. And shake out. These ideas can be encapsulated in a very, very simple formula. This comes from the old writings in Tai Chi, one of which says very simply in one line, first in the mind, that sense of gathering our attention into our body so that we're simply more aware of our body, and from that more aware of our environment, in particular the gravity, but other things as well, perhaps. And then a bit later, I think it's in the same piece, it says that the movement is rooted in the feet. This is the postural change that allows our center of gravity to drop, gives us that connection to the ground, transmitted through the legs. The legs are the things that connect our feet to our body, and we've been moving up and down. I'm going to do other exercises in a moment to show that. Controlled or directed or shaped, if you prefer, because the intent is part of this and the imagery is part of this, through the center part of the body, the telephone exchange, the junction, shall we say, and finally expressed through our arms and upper body. And so we always come back to these ideas in Tai Chi, and in particular, when you're faced with a movement that you're not sure of. And those of you who've done Tai Chi forms, you'll be very familiar with this. I can't remember the movement. We make use of that formula to remind ourselves that actually, bit by bit, we build it up. You can't get the arms correct if your foot is in the wrong place, and so on and so forth. So we come back to these basics again and again and again in Tai Chi, and we can build them up back up in a huge variety of patterns. So we're going to change the stance from the parallel stance here. Turn one foot out, and the angle is one that you can play about with. Anything between 30 and 45 degrees, that kind of angle. We keep the width of our step, so when I step forwards with my other foot, you see there's still a space between my feet. Not just forwards and backwards, of course, if I step forward, but also from left to right, across the body. And then just beginning to move your weight forwards and backwards. If you can, try and remember the feeling and the location of that point of equilibrium, that neutral point that we identified in the feet. It may have changed physically slightly, but the sense of it will still be there. Think about how much weight is going into each leg. So when you go forwards, it'll be about 60% of your weight. When you go back, a little bit more because the foot is open, the hip is open, about 70 at the moment. And trying to make the transition, the transfer of your weight from one foot to another, nice and smooth. But don't hurry. So it's very easy to find ourselves doing this. Yeah, it's like, and this is that urge. You've got to get this done because you've got to get that done, and then you've got to get that done, and we've got to multitask. Once again, just remind yourself that it doesn't have to be like that. And so I like to emphasize a sense of just resting on one leg before I move again. I go back and I rest, and then I go forwards and I rest. And we start to get this wave-like movement forwards and backwards, obviously moving the upper part of our body. And it's like a wave. And if you think about the waves on the beach, they come into the beach. Sometimes they'll just recoil straight away, but mostly what they'll do is they'll drain down first of all, and then they'll go back out. And so again, we get that sense of just a moment, a split second to settle, to be aware of our posture, make any corrections that we notice may need to be doing. Cultivating a quality that is referred to as the stillness within the movement. This isn't an either-or prospect. We're not trying to be still and then move, and after the movement coming back to stillness. We're trying to retain in our minds and in our bodies a quality of stillness that it coexists with the movement. And a good physical location for that, again, is the center of the body. This area is sometimes referred to as being like the hub of the wheel. And if you ride a bike, then the hub of the wheel is locked into the frame of the bike, or if you drive a car, and the wheel moves around that. And it's a good example of the interconnectedness and the mutual reliance of stillness and movement. Because if the wheel isn't properly locked into the frame, eventually, one way or another, you're going to come to a halt. Now, just as you sink your weight into your back foot, gently raise your front toes. So more of your weight now settled in the front. And when you go forward, push your back knee in. So you feel your hip drop, but your heel comes up. More weight goes in to the front leg. I always have my foot slightly turned out for this. I find it opens up my hips and enables the dropping of my weight, but it's slightly turned out. My overall direction is still straightforward. So I'm not doing this. If I did this, then I would be pulled around this way. I don't want that to happen. If I wanted it to happen, I would start by turning my foot out, but I don't want it to happen. Gradually, more of my weight settling through each leg, trying not to stiffen up my back or my shoulders, wanting to get to a point where I can just gently contract the empty leg, as we call it, bring the foot in and expand, and we plant the foot out. I like this term, planting of the foot. and shake out. We align the body. We allow our center of gravity to drop. These are the things that generate a quality of stability in body. Try not to think of this as an exercise in balance. A tree is not balanced on the ground. A washing line with the post isn't balancing. They're aligned, and the pole's gone down into the ground. We can't physically go down into the ground, but we can encourage this feeling of our center of gravity dropping. So change sides, have your other foot forwards, remember the space across your feet, and transferring your weight. It's important to maintain this width of step. If I'm here, then I can do this. It's quite challenging, but it's almost like I'm trying to do this on a tightrope. And of course, we do have movements and we do have postures that are different to this in Tai Chi, but this is a good posture to enable us to really work with these basic ideas, the alignment of the body, the sinking of our center of gravity, the rooting down, the significance of the weight transfer. Because when my weight moves from front to back, my whole body moves. And vice versa. I don't need to sort of do anything with my arms and my shoulders at present to encourage that movement. Beginning to raise toes and heel. Just be aware, and particularly people with more experience of doing this, there's often a tendency, say, when I raise my heel to do this, but then as soon as I pick my foot up, gravity takes over. So there's no particular reason why we should have to lean our shoulders forwards and backwards to move our leg. Unless we were trying for speed or power or something like that, but we're not at this point. And then this time, bring your foot in and through. Taking a few steps in whichever direction you wish. Notice that my foot, when it comes in, it goes out again, so it traces a semicircle. And then in the other direction, and bring your feet parallel. Shake out. So we're using the transfer of the weight to do two movements with. One is very straightforward, forwards and backwards. The other one involves a turn. So have your right foot forwards. Start with your weight in your back foot. So mirror my movements. Go forwards, and this time let that movement generate a movement through your back and your arms, swinging your hands forwards and backwards. This is fisherman castanet. Rooted in the feet, transmitted through your legs, shaped, guided, directed through the center of your body because you're looking straight ahead, and expressed in your arms. Just see if you can again feel that massaging quality deep in your shoulder joints. This time, as you go back, turn in the direction that your back foot is pointing, so to your left. And just notice how that changes what your arms are doing. You don't have to do anything different with your arms. They're swinging down in a gentle curve, slightly up at the end, of course. And this time, as you go back, let them come up a little bit further. Go forwards, and as they come down, turn your body again Bring your hands across the front hip. Turn out and back. Just making this figure of 8 shape in your arms through feet and legs. Through that rhythm of expansion and contraction, the transfer of your weight. So your arms are obviously working, but not as hard as you might think that they're working if you haven't done Tai Chi very much. And because of that, they start to flow. Shake out. So have your left foot forward. Think about the space across your legs again. And fisherman cast net. Weight goes forwards, arms go forwards. Weight goes back, arms go back. Begin to turn. Your arms swinging down across your body now. And then just allow them to swing up with expansion in the side of your body and then down. Don't let your arms go too far from your shoulders and not above the height of your shoulders. The further your arms get from your body, the more likely you are to stiffen up and to strain. Nice smooth movement. And we're going to build it into the step-in. So again, you can either go forwards or backwards, depending on where you've got the space. I'm going to go forward, so I turn my front foot out a little bit this time. I go forwards, and instead of moving my weight back, as I turn, I bring the back foot in, and I step. And then I go forwards. I may find that I'm able to raise the leg. If you try and do that and you're wobbling around, just keep the foot down until you feel that you can really sink your hips properly. It's not a major part of the exercise. Quite tricky to do. I'm going to change direction now. Take your time. Notice how I bring my foot in each time. Comes in and up. Tracting inwards, expanding upwards. This time, whichever way you're moving, just bring your feet parallel again. And shake out. Good. Now, rubbing your hands together. And then, with the pads of your fingers, first of all, tapping over your face. And then with the palms of your hands or your fingers, whichever you prefer, over your head, down to the back of your neck. Over to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. Into your back. As much of your back as you can get to comfortably down towards your hips and buttocks. You work around your hips. soften your knees and the legs, easing out some of the tightness in those big muscles of your legs. Light on your belly and onto the upper part of your chest. Shake. All of these ideas that I talked about, all of the principles, should be seen as being processes. They're the things that all of us in Tai Chi are constantly trying to work with. They're things that frankly get easily lost in the complexity of some of the movements, and as they get lost in the complexity of our daily lives. So for me, one of the key things is that even if we think that we've lost these things, we are actually able to bring our to come back to them, like the butterflies landing on the flowers for a brief moment. We can begin to feel that in the natural cycle of movements through our body. So the last exercise, reinforcing that idea, we allow gravity, bring our hips down, and then we feel the push up and we feel the expansion in our body. But even now, we feel the pull of gravity on the shoulders, gradually drawing our arms in, drawing our hands back in, and drawing our hips down, and just sort of touching base. This is called Embrace Tiger, Return to the Mountain. I think the mountain is a lovely image of this core feeling of Tai Chi, the stillness, the strength, the spaciousness in both mind and body that really just infuses the whole art. So the next time you're feeling frustrated in the supermarket queues, an image my first teacher used to use a great deal, or you're walking down the road and people keep getting in your way, or these little irritations that all of us experience in our daily lives. Think about your hips, think about the pull of gravity. See if that just helps you to just identify just that little bit of stillness. One more time. And rest. Shake out. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for watching. And those of you watching live, this will be up on YouTube soon, so you can go over it again if you wish. Thank you very much.